Good morning, class. We are back again with the last and the concluding part of our lesson, the French Revolution. In the previous classes, we saw that how the National Assembly had completed the draft of the Constitution in 1791. We had also seen that the main object was to limit the powers of the monarch. Over here, the powers, instead of being concentrated in the hands of one person, were now separated and they were assigned to different institutions, that is, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. The legislature was responsible for making laws, the executive was responsible for executing these laws, and the judiciary was responsible for maintaining the law and order within the French society. All this made France a constitutional monarchy where it was the rule of the king, but the king could be checked by the constitution. In this video, we would be seeing that from becoming a monarchy rule of a government, from having a constitutional monarchy form of a government, France becomes a republic, wherein it is the voice of the people which could be seen in the government. We would be seeing the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, who acted as a dictator. We would be also studying a certain period in France which came to be known as the Reign of Terror. Next, we would be also seeing that what was the actual status of women during the French Revolution. And lastly, how did France stand up for slavery and how finally slavery was abolished in France. As you can see this picture basically shows Louis XVI and he is accepting the constitution which was made by the National Assembly in the year 1791. Although Louis XVI had signed the constitution, but he had entered into secret negotiations with the kings of Prussia. The rulers of these neighboring countries were worried by the developments of France and they had made plans to put down their evils. Even before people could react, the National Assembly voted and they had declared a war against Prussia and Austria in the year 1792. Everywhere there were the patriotic songs like Marseillaise which were being sung. The volunteers marched with the song and this was the first time when France witnessed a movement of nationalism. This song was basically composed by the poet Roger de Lisses and today it acts as the national anthem of France. As you can see, this national anthem basically starts with a rising of the children of the fatherland. It is telling the citizens that the day of glory has arrived, wherein you need to stand up. Go and see that the bloody flag, which is the flag which is covered in blood, has raised. Hear the voices of the brave soldiers and come out and fight for your country. When all this situation was happening, these revolutions and wars brought losses and difficulties to the people. Although the Constitution of 1791 gave political rights only to the rich people of the society, but the political clubs became very important from relaying the point of view, and one of the most successful clubs was the Jacobins. Its leader was Maximilien Robespierre. If you can see the picture, this picture is of Maximilien Robespierre. Members of the Jacobin Club were from less prosperous sections of the society. This means that the members belonged to the third estate and they included small shopkeepers, artisans, printers and servants. All of them planned a revolt against the people of Paris. Later, the assembly voted to imprison the royal family. Again, which is the royal family? It was the Bourbon family of France, under which Louis XVI was being crowned as the king. The newly elected assembly was called the Convention, and finally in 1792 we see that France abolishes the monarchy rule. It abolishes the hereditary rule of a king, and finally France declares itself as a republic and a democratic country. Over the years, the periods from 1793 to 1794 is referred to as a regime of terror. There was a tense situation of terror everywhere. Robespierre followed a policy of severe control and punishment. All those whom he saw as being enemies of the republic, that is basically the first estate and the second estate people, the nobles and the clerkies, or even members of other political parties who did not agree with his methods, were arrested and imprisoned. And in case the court found them guilty, they would be glutenized. What is the meaning of the term glutenized? Glutenized comes from the term gluttony. This is a device wherein there were two long wooden poles and there was a small place where a person's head could be kept. And while just pulling one string, a person could be just beheaded from his body. Even during this tense situation, the meat and bread, which was the staple food, were rationalized. Peasants were forced to transport their grains to the cities and cells, and they were also forced to sell the prices which were fixed by the government. Robespierre persuaded his policies that even his supporters began to demand moderation. They wanted a bit more freedom and they wanted to have a moderate viewpoint. Finally, we see that Robespierre is convicted by the court in July 1794. He is arrested and on the next day he is sent to the guillotine. Next we see that although there was a new constitution which was introduced, this new constitution denied the votes to the non-prosperous sections of the society. It provided only 2 elected legislative councils, which later pointed out at a directory. This directory often clashed with the legislative council, who then sought to dismiss them. All this political stability of the directory paved the way and it gave rise for a military dictator who was known as Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself as the Emperor of France. He conquered the neighboring countries and he disposed the dynasties, created kingdoms by placing his own family members over there. Basically, his role was seen as a modernizer of Europe. He introduced many new laws such as the protection of private property and the uniform system of weight and measures which could help in the decimal system. Many saw him as a liberator who would bring freedom for the people. But soon his armies came to be viewed as an invading force. Hence, finally Napoleon was defeated at the very famous Battle of Waterloo in 1815. The next question that arises is, when France was undergoing all this revolution, what was the actual status of the women that they had shared? If you can see this picture is basically showing that the women who are basically a part of the third estate had to work very hard for their living. They worked as laundresses or they worked as people who sold flowers, fruits and vegetables at the market. Working women also had to take care of their families and children. They were disappointed that the Constitution of 1971 just gave them the status of a passive citizen. Who was a passive citizen over here? A passive citizen was a person who was denied the right to vote. They demanded their right to be voted. They demanded their right to be elected to the assembly and to hold political office. After a lot of struggle, it was finally in the year 1946 that the women in France won their right to vote. The last part of the lesson that we would be seeing is abolition of slavery. What is the meaning of the term slavery? Slavery basically means selling of humans as slaves. The slave trade basically began in the 17th century in the colonies in the Caribbean and in the San Domingo, which worked as important suppliers of the basic commodities like indigo, sugar, coffee and tobacco. These slaves were brought from the local chieftains, and this was met by a triangular slave trade between Europe, America and Africa. If you can see this triangle, America, Africa, Europe and in between the Atlantic Ocean makes a triangle, and hence this slavery was known as the triangular slave trade. The slaves had to live a very bad and pathetic condition. They were packed tightly into ships for 3-month-long voyages across the Atlantic to the Caribbean Sea, and where they were sold to the plantation owners. The National Assembly held long debates for the rights of men to be extended to all the French subjects. They wanted the slave trade to be abolished because after all it was the business of humans. Finally, slavery was abolished from the French colonies in the year 1848. Lastly, the following years, in the year 1789 in France, saw that there were many changes that happened in the lives of the men, women and children. The revolutionary government took it upon themselves to pass laws that would translate the ideas of liberty and equality into everyday practice. Liberty stands for freedom, while equality stands for the code that everyone is equal before the law. These ideas of liberty and democratic rights were the most important legacy of the French Revolution, and slowly from France it also spread its message to the rest of the parts of Europe during the 19th century. You won't be surprised to know that even our Indian Constitution borrows the terms of liberty and the concept of the democratic rights from the France or from the Revolution of France. With this, we come to an end of our lesson, the French Revolution. I hope that there is no doubts, but in case you have any doubts, you can always get back to me. Thank you, and I hope that all of you have enjoyed the video.